Welcome to Module 4. You've made it this far. You've got your Active Directory domain controllers built. Gotten some hands-on learning with Windows Server 2016. So let's continue on, and now we're in Chapter 5. And we're going to be looking at configuring, managing, and troubleshooting. So we've got lots of different objectives, such as setting up security for folders and files, and doing some troubleshooting. Also installing the distributed file system. So we've got configuring folder and file permissions. When you go to create security and sharing on a folder, you need to add either users or groups to the sharing and the security tab. So this is what the security tab looks like. We can see that we've got several different users that are there by default. It's going to be the administrator, the administrator's group, and of course system. You'll also see the users group as well, and they'll have just basically read-only access. Sometimes you need to customize permissions, so you've got to add special permissions. So if you go into the advanced section of the security tab, you'll have the option to do more granular permissions. So as you can see, these various different permissions are not just read, write, or full control. There's lots of different options in there as well, such as just traversing the files, that kind of thing. So in some cases, you may need to do more granular permissions when you have permissions that the standard permissions just aren't enough. Microsoft has lots of best practice guidelines. As a matter of fact, there's even a best practices analyzer for the file and print services. And you want to protect the Windows folder that contains, obviously, the operating system files. So, of course, those have a high security on them. You want to protect utility folders with access permissions, mainly just for the administrator and basically administrators that are in the office. And then you've got to protect software application folders as well. So really, the types of folders that you'll be giving access to people will be mainly folders with files in them that are used to be shared by various different departments. You're not going to be giving access to files that make the operating system or the applications work. Another option is to turn on auditing. Now, auditing allows us to say, hey, when somebody creates a file, deletes a file, copies a file, you could audit that. Basically, that creates a log file that says who did it, when they did it, and then if for some reason something's missing, or maybe you're concerned that person might have copied files off to take with them when they shouldn't have, then the audit event log will tell you what's going on. Permissions and auditing setup. You might want to verify who owns a folder. So you can go in to the folders that you set up sharing to, and you can go in again to the advanced section and tell you who the owner of that folder is. So if it's the administrator, great. If it's some other person and you may not want them to have that, then you may want to make changes to that. So the folder owners have all rights to the folders themselves, and they don't have to be administrators of the servers. If they're made the folder owner, then they can do whatever they want inside that folder. That may or may not be what you want. So here we see selecting users, computers, services, accounts, things like that to get access into a folder. So what you can do is you can set it up so a user or a group has access to a folder, but if you're not sure who you want to put in there, or you want to select many different people or groups at once, then what you can do is when you go to do the search, instead of putting a name in, just don't put anything in. When you don't put anything in, it finds every single person, every single object, and including the groups in Active Directory, and it lets you pick and choose. Now, if you hold down the Control key, then you can select multiple different users and groups at one time. Folder can be set up as a shared folder for users to access over the network. That's basically what we're talking about, is accessing shared folders by people so they can get their work done. So the first thing you got to do for sharing a folder or file is to make sure the file sharing is turned on. So there is a role inside Windows Server 2016. You go to Server Manager, add roles and features, and then make sure that you turn on the file sharing feature. And after that, just go ahead and right-click on a folder and go ahead and choose the properties, and you'll be able to share those folders. Now, this is also in the lab itself, so you'll be able to go into the lab with the mini videos, and a detailed description of how to do all this is in there. So we've got here the network discovery. Network discovery allows us to search for computers as well as their shared objects such as printers or folders. And what you want to do is, in order to be able to browse to other servers or other computers, you'll want to turn network discovery on. So that's the picture of what it looks like for turning network discovery on. The share permission for folders or files can be set by configuring sharing using the sharing window. Then when you configure sharing, you can use advanced sharing options if you want. So there's two different options when you go into share a folder. One is just basic sharing and one is advanced sharing. So basic sharing is an easy way to do it. However, advanced sharing gives you some additional options, such as allowing the files to be cached so they can be taken off-site. It also is a faster way of sharing as well, because what I've found is if you have a folder with, say, a terabyte of data in it and you go to do basic sharing, what it does is it changes all the permissions while you wait, and that could take 5 minutes, 10 minutes, even longer. Whereas if you do advanced sharing, it does all of that additions to all the files below it after you close the box, so you can continue on to other folders to share. So I find that doing the advanced sharing actually turns out to be easier than the easy sharing option. So this is the basic easy sharing option. This is what the box looks like. When you right click, you go to properties, or you could just right click and choose share. Either one of those will get you here. If you go to properties, you'll go to the share tab or sharing tab. And then you've got, by default, you see who the users and the administrator has on there, and you can make changes to those if you want. You can cache a folder to make the contents available offline, as I mentioned earlier. Easier to do that through the advanced sharing. That option isn't there through the easy share. Folder can be cached in 3 different ways. So only the files and programs that users specify will be available, or none, or all the files and programs that the users specify. So a few different ways to do that. It is a bit of a risk to take the files offline by caching these shares to their computers. So you want to make sure that you encrypt the files and folders that are on those laptops or other devices. So that way, if the devices get stolen or lost, then you won't have to notify all your customers that you've lost their data. And I've seen companies go out of business because of that. So it's definitely something you want to make sure that you have all of that data encrypted in case that stuff is lost. And we'll talk about that too. So this is what the advanced sharing looks like. It's not that much different than the easy one, except for you click on the permissions box. It also allows you to add multiple names. Sometimes you want to share the folder with multiple names. I don't know why you'd want to do that, but sometimes people want to do that. Server Manager. This is another way to configure folder and file permissions. So you could just right-click on a folder and go to sharing, or go to properties and the sharing tab, or you could go to Server Manager and choose the file permissions option from there, and then you can set up some additional things that you can't do with just basic sharing. Such as you can pick these options that you see here, the SMB protocol. You can pick NFS for Unix and Linux computers for sharing. So you've got a lot of different options, even access to folder quotas, so you can limit the amount of data that people can save to those shares. So if you really want to do some advanced work, then you want to do this through Server Manager in the file and printer sharing area. You can also publish an object that makes it available when they access or when they view Active Directory contents. That makes it much easier for the users to find it. Now, typically in most companies, they're not going to allow you to browse to shares. So what they're going to do is they're going to map network shares to drive letters. But not all companies do this, so this is an alternative way that it's saying here, where you browse through File Explorer to look for the various different shares. Windows Server 2016 offers the Effective Access tab. So what Effective Access does for us is it tells us what rights the person is going to have. So even if you go to share a folder, it doesn't mean that that's the rights they have. And here's why. Because access to data is a combination of the sharing tab and the security tab. And so you're going to go for whatever the least amount of access is between the sharing and the security tab. And if you don't want to go through all that, you can go to the Effective Access tab, and then it'll tell you exactly what your rights are. So that way, if you want to give a person full rights or specific rights, then you look at the Effective Access, and it tells you if they have the rights you think that they're going to have. So when files and folders are created, copied, or moved, the permissions can be affected. So basically, if you move any files or folders within the same share, they're going to continue to likely have the same amount of effective permissions. If you move it outside the share into another share, then they're going to inherit the rights that are underneath that other share. If you move it to a completely different partition, like a different drive letter or a different server, then they're not going to take their permissions with them. So you're going to need to set those permissions back up again. Unless you want to have the security tab permissions taken with them. There are special programs where you can copy, such as RoboCopy, Xcopy, and some newer programs that are built into Windows that allow you to take the permissions with them, but you have to do this through command line. So if you drag and drop, then they're going to lose all of their security permissions when you go from one partition to the next. Work folders, this is a new type of thing, came out in Windows Server 2012 and also available, of course, in 2016. So this is sort of a competitor to the Dropbox idea, where Dropbox is a third-party program that came out and said, hey, you can drop files into Dropbox and then somebody else can log in, and if you share those files with them, they can have access to them no matter where they are. Work folders is the same kind of thing, except for it's all done through Windows Server 2016. It's not done outside of the network. So you create the work folders, and when you open up File Explorer, you'll see the work folders option. And you'll see an actual folder that looks like a Dropbox folder. And inside there, you can drop files in and you can share them with other people, and they can get access to those files even when they're outside of the company. You can share access to contractors, employees, non-employees, whoever it is that you want. The same way you can do it with Dropbox, but this way it's free through Windows Server 2016. So there is a video on this if you're interested in work folders on my YouTube channel, so you can email me if you want. I'll send you a link to that if you can't find it. But it's a very nice thing to do. It's not going to be covered very well in this course, but if it's something you want to do on your own, just to sort of get the experience of it, then that's definitely going to be a good idea. All right, so we have bring your own devices. A lot of companies are doing bring your own devices, such as phones and tablets and sometimes laptops, but typically not so much at most companies. And that can definitely cause a lot of problems when it comes to security. So that's one of the things that work folders can actually resolve. People can use their own devices and not worry about infecting the network by connecting through VPN or connecting directly while they're on the LAN. So work folders allows them to be on their own separate work group, separate from Active Directory, and they can still get access to files and folders without infecting you. So that is a really great feature for work folders. So to use work folders, you got to install the Work Folders Role service, and then there's some steps that are outlined in the book on page 227, and as I mentioned, I also have a video on them. Now, distributed file system is another way that you can give access to users. In this case, besides just sharing the folders, a distributed file system also replicates the data to other locations. So if you have, let's say, two servers, one server next to the other, and you have all the data copied to one server and you want it replicated to a second server, just in case the first server goes down. DFS lets you do that. So You can set up the synchronization. You have to install the DFS roles. There's 2 roles, the namespace and the replication, and we'll be doing that in this class. So unlike work folders where we won't be doing that, we will actually be doing DFS in this class. So lots of advantages to DFS. The permissions stay the same. It's fault tolerant, highly available. Once you set this up, it's fairly foolproof. It doesn't break very often. It's a pretty solid product. And it's also what Microsoft uses to replicate Active Directory from one domain controller to the other. So when you install DFS, if you do it on a domain controller, as you'll be doing in the lab, you'll be seeing actually your domain controller's replication going on, already set up in DFS, even though you didn't do it. And that's because when you installed Active Directory, it used DFS in the background. All of the files and folders are replicated automatically. There is a feature that if you have the servers separated into 2 physically different locations and you have a slow connection between the 2, DFS allows you to slow down the amount of bandwidth it uses during the daytime and then crank it up at night, so that way you can get the replication all done at night but not slow down things too much during the day. You can use DFS in a standalone or a domain-based model. We'll be doing the domain-based model because we'll be using Active Directory, but you don't have to do it that way. So there is a namespace that comes with DFS, and all of that is going to be explained in the DFS mini video, so make sure you take a look at that in the lab itself. DFS is installed as a file services role, so you'll find both of the DFS roles under, when you go to Server Manager, Add Remove Roles, you'll see it in the file as a subcategory to the File and Storage Services role. And again, that's all covered in the video. So there's several steps to creating the namespace root, and all of this is covered, so we'll just go ahead and continue on. But it is, DFS is a great type of thing to do. You can delegate management of a DFS namespace, so the day-to-day activities can be managed by an assistant. So that's kind of nice. You don't have to have another administrator set up to do this. You could have a non-administrator that you just give DFS rights to. So very nice. All right, so here we have the properties. You can specify the amount of times client's cache information. As I mentioned earlier, there is some flexibility into DFS, such as the amount of bandwidth it uses, but there's also the amount of data being cached as well. So I have seen on occasion some problems with DFS where you end up trying to replicate too much data and it gets kind of stuck and takes too long to replicate. Well, you can increase the amount of cache it uses so that doesn't happen. So disk quotas. This is something else you'll be doing in our 279W labs. Disk quotas prevents users from filling the disk to capacity. In the past, before this was a possibility, I have had a single user end up dumping their entire several terabytes of their desktop or laptop onto their server, and it caused everything to fill up. So disk quotas keep that from happening. It does it on a per user basis. So it's a fairly easy thing to set up and to manage, and we go over that in the lab and the mini videos. So we covered a lot of different things. DFS, talked a little bit about disk quotas, talked about work folders, and some other, some troubleshooting techniques as well, and also file sharing and advanced file sharing. So lots of things covered in this particular summary, and of course you'll want to go right to the lab, check out the videos to help you through it. And if you have any questions, you can always call or email, and we can do a remote session and help you out anytime you need it. So go ahead and get started on Lab 4. Good luck, and we'll see you in Module 5.